All right. Well, welcome everyone to this webinar about US EPR compliance. It's so good to see so many familiar companies from our compliance work in the Philippines. We decided to hold this session early this year because we realized so many folks we've been talking to either did not know that they had compliance requirements under the new US laws or did know but are having a hard time meeting reporting deadlines. So today I will have Sebastian, our US CEO, and Russell, our US products and services lead, tell you all about what's needed and how you can navigate this new and complex set of laws. At the end, we will leave some time for Q&A, so please don't worry about not getting to answer your questions. Maybe if you have any questions during the presentation, just type them in and we will get to them at the end. Anyone who is unable to get their questions answered, please don't worry. You can easily still get your questions answered by requesting time with our team. We will make sure to book that with you separately. And that's it for me. Take it away, Sebastian.
Great. Thanks, Nanette. Welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time and for your interest in this topic. There was already a question posted about the materials. Yes, we will share the materials afterwards for those either who couldn't make it or who want to dive deeper. But for now, we'll dive in. So we are here to talk about extended producer responsibility, specifically packaging related extended producer responsibility laws in the United States. As many of you know, there's been a lot of effort put into trying to come up with what is called the Global Plastics Treaty to get to a common set of regulation. That has not happened to regulate packaging and to fund infrastructure, et cetera. That has as yet not happened. And so what's been happening all around the world, some of you will be familiar with this in other jurisdictions like the Philippines or in Europe or in South America, is that individual countries and now states are implementing their own laws to regulate packaging. So we're going to go over in detail what to expect in the US specifically, but I want to set it up at a high level first. First of all, what is extended producer responsibility? Well, extended producer responsibility, state by state in the US, is a law by which producers, and I'll get into what producers are defined as, must register with a producer responsibility organization. Typically, there's one PRO in each jurisdiction, and they have to report their packaging that is being sold or delivered into the market. And then based on that amount of packaging and different packaging types, plastic, cardboard, et cetera, pay fees that are based on that material and the volumes, and that varies quite a bit by jurisdiction. Why are they doing this? Well, ultimately, the intent is to try to incentivize a responsible set of actions around reducing the amount of undesirable packaging, if you will, through actions that companies will take to offset those fees. Also, to use those fees to help fund or improve new and improved infrastructure for recycling in those states, and then to increase, therefore, the amount of recycled content being utilized and ultimately have better design. And then the other thing, which I'll highlight in a moment, is just the fact that, unfortunately, as much as we'd like for all of these states to be consistent in the way they implement these laws, they aren't. They define the packaging types differently. They have different fee structures, et cetera, which we'll get into more detail later. Let's go forward here, Russell. So where are we seeing EPR laws go into effect? It's still early days in the US. For those familiar with Europe, Europe is much further down the path, and almost every country in Europe has EPR laws, and now they're even instituting now more consistent and harmonized laws across Europe. It is very different in the US, given that the federal government has decided not to take action against packaging and plastic waste, each state has started to devise their own laws. And what you'll see here are a number of states where EPR laws are either in place or have been announced already, with others still to come. The two that are really already active are Oregon and Colorado, with California coming soon behind, but Washington, Minnesota, Maryland, Maine, and others, even New York and others, are on their way. So we expect to see a proliferation of EPR laws across the United States in the coming couple of years. So what do we mean by the responsible producer? The definition of producer is very specific, and it's sort of a decision tree. And it starts at the top here. Typically, most producers are brand owners who are selling their goods into a jurisdiction, let's say California. Even if you're selling it through retailers, you are the responsible party for the packaging of your material in most situations. If you are not the producer along that definition, but you are a licensee or a franchisee who is then branding that material or that content, the product, and the packaging associated with it, then the licensee becomes the producer. And if there is no licensee, and it's, let's say, a white label product that is produced for a retailer, then it could be the retailer or the distributor who becomes the responsible producer who has to provide the data on their packaging footprint and then submit that and pay the fees. So that's the general hierarchy of responsibility and the jurisdictions in which you will find EPR laws. I'm going to hand off to Russell, who's going to go much more deeply now into the design of these laws and what you need to do to address them.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sebastian. So I have plenty of content to go through here. I just want to remind everybody that you can ask questions by typing them into the Q&A feature in Zoom. We'll have time at the end to come back to any of these, and we don't want to forget them either. So I'm going to start with an overview of EPR exemptions. This is a very common question that companies have, especially with some of the new and changing laws in the US, and the fact that each law and each scope in each state is a little bit different. So the main categories of exemptions are, first off, small producers. Depending on the state, if your revenue in that state is under 1, 2, or 5 million, 1 million being the most common, you're exempt. Either you don't have to comply or there's like a small producer threshold that makes compliance a lot simpler. The second one is materials covered under other laws. There are bottle bills that are very common in the US where deposits get paid at the point of sale and then customers get those deposits back on bottles. Material like that is typically exempt. The next one is federally regulated products. These are typically drugs, hazardous materials, some specialty products like infant formula. These types of things are exempt, and this is one of the places where the laws really vary by state. And the last one is some B2B packaging. It's a little bit different in each situation, but usually if it's reusable packaging, it doesn't go to consumers, it'll be exempt. Again, this list isn't exhaustive and it varies a little bit by state, but it's important to understand as a producer what your exemptions are because nobody wants to be reporting and paying for material that is technically exempt under the state law. The next thing we'll talk about is the PRO compliance by state. So how do you comply? You are a producer, you have non-exempt material. What do you do next? So we're looking at the 7 states that are in progress. There's more to come, even the ones on this state. Some are more advanced than others. Kind of advanced is kind of goes left to right generally on the page. Each state has a different law. The name is different in each state, just to highlight the fact that it is a state law, not a national law. That's why the names are here. The second thing in how to comply is who is your PRO? In most states, it's going to be the Circular Action Alliance. This was founded by some of the biggest CPG companies in the US about 5-10 years ago. They are now acting as the PRO in most states. They are leading legislative development. They are becoming basically the national PRO. It's not national, but that's how it's playing out. They're already the PRO in these first four states, Maine, Washington, and Maryland. It's likely CAA will be the PRO or a PRO that companies will comply through. There are alternatives to compliance through a PRO, but it's not particularly attractive. In California, there's a narrow, difficult way to do it. You essentially have to prove that your material is getting recycled at state thresholds through your own company analysis. It's pretty hard to do. Pretty much no one is doing it in the market. That's how hard it is. Colorado and Washington, you require direct company approval or direct approval per company from the government if you aren't going to be part of the PRO with CAA. Maine's to be determined. It's probably going to be CAA. And then Maryland, you can self-report, but the Maryland law is a few years away from really picking up steam. So I think there'll be more announcements on how it's going to work in Maryland. There's two more sets of dates here. We have registration dates and reporting dates. Registration means when the company needs to register as a obligated producer within the state. So the ones in red, those have already passed. If you have not registered in California, Colorado, Oregon, and Minnesota, that needs to happen. They're still open for registration. I'm not aware of any penalties that have come out yet, but you do need to register. Maine, Washington, and Maryland, those are coming on later this year for registration. But their reporting, Maine, Washington, Maryland, comes out a little bit later. Maine, while it does have reporting in May of 26, it is like a high-level estimate of what you had in 25. California, Colorado, and Oregon. Here, I'll use my mouse. These are the most advanced. Colorado and Oregon had 2024 data that already needed to be reported last year in 2025. So if you have not done that, you are late. And then CAA has aligned reporting across the three states for May 31st, 2026, when you would be reporting on your 2025 production that was put into the market. The takeaway on this slide is that registering and reporting with CAA is the best way to go for pretty much every company in almost every situation. And you need to be on top of it because the dates are coming up. Some registration dates have already passed. I won't spend as much time on this one, but there is some fees that can be assessed. I have the three most advanced states up here as just a selection of the broader state population. California, Colorado, and Oregon, they have all had some dates that have passed in terms of reporting. Fees will start to come out, fees being the amount of money that you pay to the PRO for the material that you report. And then under each law, there are potential fines. California is super high, up to $50,000 per day for non-compliance. Colorado, even $1,500 to $6,000. That adds up quickly. And Oregon is $25,000 per day. We're not exactly sure how CAA will start to enforce this, but it will certainly be coming. There are also some generalized penalties across the states. Legal action could be taken. As the PRO, CAA has the right under most state laws to impose penalties, even beyond what the state fines might be. And there's interest rates that can be applied if you are late in reporting. So there's a number of things that were downsides that are typically not worth it for non-compliance. So we talked about EPR generally. We're going to talk a little bit more specifically for California just for a moment because they have a very unique aspect to their EPR law. It's called source reduction. And it requires, here in the blue box, a 25% reduction of the plastic. The EPR covers all your packaging, but they have a specific provision in their law for the plastic where you have to reduce the amount of plastic you put to market in absolute terms by 2032. And I'm going to get into that next, but I also wanted to highlight California also has some aggressive recyclability targets, meaning that your packaging portfolio will have to transform to ensure that 100% of it is recyclable or compostable by 2032. I saw someone raised their hand. Please hold that thought or type it in as a question, and we will get back to all questions at the end. This is how source reduction works in California. Your 2023 baseline is set in stone. There was a voluntary reporting date in November of last year. The mandatory reporting date and individual company source reduction plan is due this spring. But the mechanics behind this are illustrated here. In this black line in the middle, you have your 2023 baseline. This is the amount of plastic you put to market in 2023. By 2032, you have to have a 25% absolute reduction. There's no provision for growth. There's no provision for anything else like that. It just has to be 25% less plastic than you used in 2023. There's some interim goals along the bottom related to source reduction and some refill and reuse and elimination targets that are detailed in the law. The tricky thing about the source reduction, though, is the area in blue. For companies that are growing at 2, 3, 4%, typical economic growth factor, if companies don't make any changes and they continue to grow from 2023, assuming their plastic packaging grows with them, that implies a 40 to 50% actual source reduction that needs to happen from what your plastic footprint would have been in 2032. And again, California has confirmed a couple of times that there is no provision for economic growth. It is a very aggressive target to reduce your amount of plastic packaging by this much. You can switch into, other materials, but the plastic must be reduced. There's a few things here on CAA source reduction. If you've been joining the CAA webinars, you may know some of this. If not, these are a few new things that have been announced from CAA over how source reduction is going to work. The first is a cap with a malus. Essentially, you will have a cap for how much plastic you can put into the market. And CAA has said that the malus fees, a malus being a penalty for not staying under the cap, must meaningfully increase the cost of exceeding the targets. To us, this says that putting too much plastic into the market is going to be very expensive. The next one is individual source reduction plans. Each company will have an individual source reduction plan. And there were many questions about whether an individual company's source reduction plan could be less than 25%. And CAA's response was that it's possible. We're not sure exactly what every company's individual target is going to be, but CAA as a whole has to get to 25%. So that makes it very likely that every company on average is going to have to reduce by 25%. The methodology for these individual source reduction plans has not yet been announced, but it's certainly on the way this spring. As I said before, there's no adjustment for growth. If your company is growing, you still have to reduce the amount of plastic compared to 2023. There's an alternative compliance with PCR up to 8%. This simply means that you can use additional recycled content in your packaging products in terms of plastic that will count towards the source reduction target. We think this will be some of the easiest source reductions and where companies will go first because many types of packaging are already using PCR. There is a provision for prior reduction credit. In CAA, in the law requires CAA to give credit or recognition for companies who have made prior efforts. However, they have confirmed that it has to be an absolute reduction over the prior 10 years. So it is unlikely that many companies will get much credit for this simply because 10 years of growth between 2013 and 2022, unlikely to have an absolute reduction in plastic. Shifting to non-recyclable doesn't count. So if you have a recyclable package that you wish to lightweight and turn it into say, a flex format. That's like a legacy way of lightweighting, very common. If that flex format is not recyclable, that does not count as a source reduction because of California's goals to increase recyclability and actual recycling rates. There will be complex reporting that comes along with this, more from CAA on this, but there are a few pathways that companies can follow to make these reductions, and you'll be required to report on each. And finally, California announced trading. If you are able to source reduce beyond your reduction targets, there is an opportunity to recoup some of your investments by selling credits, kind of like a cap and trade in carbon, back to the market. So many more ongoing developments on all of this, but some insight into what's happening with the source reduction law in California, which is going to be the most novel and innovative and difficult for many companies to comply with of all the states in the US that we're talking about today. This is a quick look at the economics of how it works. So on the left, you see the CAA base fees in red. This is what is happening in every state and what happens generally in most EPR programs, especially what we've seen in Europe. You report on the amount of packaging you have, you pay base fees on these every year, and you're done. That's it. But to sort for source reduction, there's a few other places that are mostly avoidable but can be very expensive. The first one is the cap malus. Reuse and refill and elimination, and then your cap malus for the amount of plastic that you can use. CAA has said the malus fees must meaningfully increase the cost of exceeding targets and would lead to the biggest financial impact if missed. I don't know if they can say it any louder. Not hitting source reduction goals is going to be very expensive. The next one is the base fees. We already talked about that. The RRE malus, these are implied penalties for not meeting quotas. CAA needs to explain a lot more about what these quotas are going to be. But presumably, some amount of your reductions need to come from reuse and refill systems or elimination, which is defined as just a straight removal of a plastic component, not replacing it with paper or something like that, just getting rid of the component in general. The biggest one with the question mark is trading. This could have a triple compounding ROI for companies. If a company can reduce beyond their targets, not only are they not going to pay base fees on that, not only are they going to avoid any of the malices from getting beyond their targets, but they can sell these tradable allowances back to the market. More to understand where that works, but companies who take early action make big changes, potential major upside in terms of EPR fees, how that goes. And then finally, while smaller, there are some bonuses for hitting to be determined eco-modulation, PCR, elimination, RRE, etc. This needs to be explained a little bit better by California. All right. So building your packaging EPR strategy. What do you do? How do you think about it? How do you organize things within your company when there are multiple states, the list is growing, there's complexity? How do you framework this to get your team going? The first step that we recommend as PCX is aligning your data. So you need a baseline to establish systems and track progress and understand how you're doing. You're going to need to report on this data anyway. So you need to collect your data. You need to structure it for regulatory reporting and be able to manage it with clear ownership automation and be ready for an audit. So this means who owns it, how do they collect it, what's the process for this? This is something that every company needs to figure out. Next is setting targets. So translating your obligations into measurable business commitments. Based on your particular company's packaging portfolio, your footprint, things that are exempt, what targets do you want to hit? Maybe you want to change your packaging. Maybe you want to minimize your packaging. Maybe you want to invest in reuse and refill. You need to figure that out and then adapt it by market to market because the requirements are a little different state by state. Maybe for something that's a little more aggressive, you want to pilot this in a state that's requiring you to do more, for example. And then you translate that into KPIs and cascade that down to the brand and SKU level owners, because making changes in packaging like this isn't just going to impact the regulatory team. It's going to impact the supply chain. It's going to impact branding and marketing. It's really going to be a team effort, and a program needs to be managed around that. The next step is developing your strategy, when and where to make changes. You're going to want to be able to evaluate all your packaging options for some of your packaging types. Maybe you go with something that's off the shelf, that's already ready, you just haven't tried it yet. For some of them, you might need to truly innovate and do something new. Each of these are going to have business cases based on consumer preferences, based on EPR fees. You'll have to build a business case, do whatever it takes internally to be able to make the case for the changes that you need to make. And then, as I said before, collaborate your supply chain, your brand owners, your packaging engineers, your regulatory folks. And then finally, you get to operationalization and communication. Delivering progress, communicating progress. This is both communication internally, it's communication with the PROs, it's frankly communication with the customers. If you are talking about your sustainability journey, what you're doing about packaging, how you're helping the community, all of those things, these are all things that you can build into your program. And speaking of program, how does it look? This is a look at, a way you might want to organize. The first one is operational execution. You want to be able to set these data targets that we talked about on the prior slide and be able to extend it across borders and EPR schemes. So if you have this data for one state in the US, or maybe it's regionally for North America, you need to build out that muscle so that you can report in other markets. Next, you need a packaging strategy. What are your quick wins? Who are your partners? Is your supply chain involved? How is there a PMO? Do you have a project manager who's just doing this, for example? And then over time, that needs to turn into long-term governance and decision making and ongoing strategy evaluation. And finally, making reductions, making changes. Some states like California do require reductions, but other states, if you can reduce your packaging footprint a little bit, you're going to be saving money on EPR fees and possibly streamlining operations as well. So there's a number of quick wins. You need a long-term foundation to be able to set some of these long-term shifts. And as I mentioned before, you might want to try pilots possibly in California because the laws are more stringent, but maybe somewhere else that's a better footprint for your business. So how are we seeing companies tackle this right now? Typically, companies are running into a little bit of a morass with this, where the efforts are not scalable, they're high cost, and it's becomes a manual effort all around that's hard to maintain. So what we've seen with the companies that we work with at PCX is companies typically follow a playbook kind of like this. First, someone is learning about EPR, especially in the US where it's new, there isn't an EPR person that's been doing it for 10 years. Somebody has to become the expert. And they'll typically start to collect data. This might come from an ERP system. It might come from a financial system like NetSuite. It might come from supplier RFIs. And this all gets rolled together and consolidated. And then you run into some issues. So, for example, this icon here, same packaging, different reporting everywhere. I'm going to go forward for a second and then go back. This is just a look at some of the packaging between California and Oregon. We haven't even talked about Colorado, Minnesota, Maryland, Maine, any of those others yet. The exact same packaging on each of these lines, different names in each jurisdiction. While a different name is a small thing, once you manifest that across multiple jurisdictions, it starts to get complicated. And so then it gets submitted and becomes a program that needs to be maintained. The calculation, submission, fee payment, policy tracking, it becomes a program that needs to be managed annually, and it results in compounding risk, cost, and effort, across the whole company. So that's what we're seeing right now. All is not lost. There are solutions for how to manage this. And with that, I want to hand it back over to Sebastian. He'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we as PCX have been supporting companies with.
Thanks, Russell. And I do see some questions coming in. Please, everyone, feel free to continue to post those questions. We will come back to them. So I will complete the next few pages here, and then we'll come back and start addressing the questions directly. But I want to pick up where Russell left off. What Russell highlighted was he went through it very fast, and I'm sure it was a bit bewildering and overwhelming. And what he also described was the complexity that companies are dealing with and how they're going about doing it in an often ad hoc and pretty inefficient way, and asking people to do work that isn't really their day job. So at PCX, we have a mission to ensure that no plastic waste enters nature. And so this particular topic of EPR compliance is right at the heart of delivering on that mission. But as PCX, we actually have three main pillars to what we bring to the table. We're going to come back to this top one, which is what we call PCX Responsibility Intelligence, which directly addresses both advisory and software tools to enable effective EPR compliance and strategies to optimize your packaging. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But below that, you see two other bubbles here, one on recovery marketplace on the right-hand side, where PCX is broadly seen as the global leader in delivering on plastic waste recovery around the world. You see a number up here in the top left of 181 million kilograms of verified plastic recovery already as an organization through our project partners. We basically work with project partners in 15 countries, soon growing to 17 and 18, helping them to fund the responsible standards-based collection and responsible processing of plastic waste to get it away from nature. And then for those companies, as part of their strategies that are also trying to increase the amount of recycled content in their packaging, we offer through those same projects the ability to access high quality certified recycled offtake in the form of pellets and resin, et cetera. And we help facilitate access to those materials through our circular plastics offering. So holistically, that's what PCX brings to the table. And as you can see, we work with over 200 companies around the world in supporting them with these various offerings. So let me do a double click quickly on the responsibility intelligence side of things, which again comes back to addressing this challenge of EPR compliance, particularly with the complexity of EPR compliance in different jurisdictions, such as the multiple states in the US. You want to click forward there, please? So PCX offers a software tool, a SaaS software tool called Responsibility Intelligence. But more than the tool is critical, and I'm going to show you some of the components of it. But the way I describe it is it's table stakes. The tool is a great enabler and a great scaling mechanism. However, alongside the tool, it's really a three-pronged capabilities that matter here. One is, as you can probably tell from the call, we bring very deep EPR policy intelligence and expertise, not only through PCX Markets, but through our sister organization, PCX Solutions, that works in policy organizations all over the world. We are a part of the global treaty discussions. We've been to every global treaty meeting. We are in constant discussion with countries and states around the world to both inform and influence, but also to understand what's coming next, not just what the rules are today, but what to in the future. And by working with responsibility intelligence, you get access to that expertise. And then the second pillar here is the fact that we have a global team of experienced EPR analysts. And why is that important? Well, I've had many companies come to us and say, hey, we're really interested in your software tool. I assume it's plug and play, meaning I can sign up and I can just plug my data in and the answers will all be presented to me, both in terms of my fees and my compliance and my strategies. And the answer is, it's very helpful, but there's no way, and if anybody else is suggesting to you that they do have a plug and play solution that solves all your problems just as a software tool, They're lying because there is complexity. The data that you're importing is often formatted in a multitude of ways, whether it's through a BOM or through an ERP system or what have you. That needs to be scrubbed. There needs to be quality checking. There needs to be ensuring that you are complying with the latest fees and doing the reporting on the back end. So our analyst team has a lot of experience doing this and can do it in a very leveraged and cost-effective way so that your people don't have to. And then all of that is built on top of this software platform of responsibility intelligence. Overall, what this does as a scalable platform solution is to enable you to deliver your required compliance, but also more intelligence in the decisions and the strategic choices you make about packaging at lower cost, at lower complexity, at lower risk, and higher effectiveness. So if you go to the next page, this is just some screenshots. It's very small and hard to see, and we're happy to walk anyone through a demo of the platform. And even if you provide us with some of your data, we can show you how your own data manifests in it. But effectively, what the platform allows you to do is first and foremost, create harmonized data set that allows you to have greater visibility on your packaging data in one place. You can import your data from various jurisdictions. You can cut it by jurisdiction. You can cut it by business unit. You can cut it by category of products, however you like, to see which SKUs are driving your greatest packaging requirements and ultimately the greatest fees. You can see where the fees are flowing most in terms of the materials that you utilize, all of which allows us to then generate reports for compliance, custom reports that fit the requirements of each jurisdiction. As Russell said, Colorado's reporting requirements are different than California's. Our tool produces the output for each of those jurisdictions so that basically with one click you have the file that needs to be submitted, that you need to submit. Unfortunately, we can't submit it for you. That's the legal requirement, but the tool will generate that report for you to submit for compliance purposes. And then maybe last and most importantly is what I described as the intelligence piece of this, which is it's one thing to understand your packaging data. It's another thing to understand the fees that you owe. The most important thing is what do you do about it? And how do you make informed decisions, management decisions, business decisions around are there packaging alternatives to reduce my fees? Are there strategies I can employ? Does it apply more to one category of my products or one business unit or one SKU that is the overwhelming cost and fee exposure for me? And how do I start taking action? And that goes hand in hand with some of our advisory services around source reduction advice or other packaging strategy advice that we can provide in addition to the platform itself. So where do you go next in all of this? Again, can be pretty overwhelming. Russell laid out our view on what an overall roadmap is for what you need to do. This is to just sort of leave you with specific next steps that we would recommend. First and foremost, get your data together. And again, this is never easy. It's never simple. Some companies have it better organized than others. We've seen every single version of this imaginable, but you need to organize your data by packaging types, by volume, by SKU, et cetera. Understand how much of it is recycled material, non-recyclable material, paper, plastic, et cetera. Organize that in a way that can be plugged into a platform like ours and that can be analyzed properly to inform what your fee exposure is. Second is to start developing internal operations and a cadence for how you're going to do the reporting operationally, but as importantly, how you're going to develop strategies to capture low-hanging fruit for reduction of fees or changes in your packaging that can generate quick wins versus defining long-term roadmaps and investment theses and business cases for changing your packaging downstream. And then start testing and rolling out those strategies. So we talk about pilots for elimination, pilots for lightweighting, which tends to be one of the easier first steps that you can take, refill and reuse solutions. Where will those fall on a long-term roadmap over time? And then lay that roadmap out and set up a program plan. And it's really like any large scale program in the company that requires a number of people from different functions in the company, whether they're policy folks, sustainability folks, operations and supply chain folks, marketing, et cetera, coordinating to manage that roadmap over time. That's our recommended approach of what you need to do to be effectively addressing the proliferation of these laws that's happening around the world, but certainly in the US. So I'm going to pause there, and we are going to pause and start taking some of your questions. And thank you for those who've already started posting them. So I'm going to read these out, and then one of us, Russell, Nanette, or I will jump in, maybe more than one of us. The first question that was teed up here was, can you talk more about the penalties? Is it per item SKU or per $1 million of packaging? Russell, maybe you want to take that.
Yep,
Volume and weight.
I'm happy to
Yeah.
take that one. So the penalties are by company at the company level. In the laws, it's outlined as like the penalty for a compliant company that is, not within compliance up to the levels outlined in that previous slide. So it was $50,000 a day in California, a little bit less than some of the other states. We haven't seen CAA or regulators taking action on any companies yet. So I see this question. It's asking if it's per item SKU or $1 million worth of packaging. It is unclear exactly how that's going to be enforced, but it is at the company level. So I hope that helps a little bit.
And by the way, if you have follow-ups, feel free to keep posting them. But I'll go to the next one. The question here was, I'm an importer from the Philippines. What do I need to be concerned about for this new regulation? And I think the fundamental question here is the definition of producer again. If you are an importer whose branded products are being sold in one of these states above the threshold of the minimum revenue or volume requirements, then you will be accountable as a producer for those fees. I don't know, Russell, if you wanted to add something to that, but so you will need to be concerned with it if that's the case.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it, Sebastian.
Great. And if you're importing on a white label basis or as a supplier to a producer who's then packaging that product, you are not responsible, per the discussion we had earlier. Okay, here's a related question, I think. When sales are made through multi-state distributors or third-party e-commerce platforms, how is state-level sales attribution typically determined for threshold calculations? Is attribution based on ship to address, distributor sell-through data, or another proxy when direct sale state-level visibility is limited?
I'll take that
Yeah,
one.
yeah. Go
So
ahead.
that is a tricky question, and every producer who is a multi-state larger organization is trying to work this out. The blessing and the curse of what's been outlined by CAA and how they plan to implement the laws is that it's up to the producer to decide the methodology and allocation and how they're going to calculate that. So if a company is, just as an example, um, let's say you make a packaged good that you don't sell directly in a store. It goes to Walmart distribution centers, and you send it to centers that are, on the border between states. And you're not sure how much of this is being sold in Colorado versus, next door in Wyoming. Um, you would need to estimate, how much is going which direction, work with your customer, with Walmart in this case, how much of your product is going to which stores. Sending them an RFI would be one way to do that. Um, the way you have to report it, though, when you report how much packaging is going to market or the fact that, are or not are not exempt in a state, is you have to outline the methodology that you used in doing that, why you did it that way, why you think it's accurate, what assumptions had to be made, and that gets submitted along with your data. And so if CAA were to come back and audit, or if the state regulator were to do spot checks or audit, or if your um, reporting looked out of line with how much of your packaging appears to be in the market, if you were a very large producer, something like that could easily happen. Your methodology would come back, and that would be part of an investigation. This is something that we can help with. This is something that's not often a area of expertise for companies. There are a lot of questions like this that go to CAA directly. If you have really specific questions about a certain situation, we're happy to help.
So I'm going to combine a couple of questions that are related to California specifically and the 2023 baseline. The question is, what is that baseline? And if we've been very active in reducing our packaging footprint since 2023 or before, sorry, if it's before 2023, will that be taken into account? Um,
Yeah, I can answer
Russell,
that
you
one.
want to go? I can. Yeah.
Sebastian, I think you said the question was if we have been active in reducing our footprint, and this is for California because of the source
Yes,
reduction law, I
because
believe.
it's a source reduction law. Yes.
Um, do we get credit for that, or what does that mean if we did it before 2023? That would be, um, you would have to show an absolute reduction in your packaging footprint, your plastic packaging footprint between the years of 2013 and 2022, which are all prior to 2023. If you could show an absolute reduction in the amount of plastic you put into market, irregardless of your sales, then there is a way to get some credit to apply towards your future source reduction obligations, but there would have to be an absolute reduction for that to take account. Of course, if you've been making reductions since 2023, since 2023 is your baseline year, and you had a big reduction in 2024, congratulations, you're already on the way to hitting the compliant targets.
Yeah, and look, I know that this can be confusing and even frustrating, is particularly for California because they have not announced the fee structure yet. Because it is different than other states in terms of the focus on source reduction and the 8% recycled material rule. For those who are not aware, PCX did work closely with CAA on how to start designing the program to respond to the California EPR law. They are continuing to work on finalizing that and expect to announce more in the March-April timeframe that will provide more details on the costs associated with meeting compliance. But again, the first step is to ensure that you have your data in order, you're submitting your data to CAA so that they can use that information to inform the fees, hopefully make them more targeted and more cost effective as well.
Yeah, and one thing I want to add to that point, Sebastian, is that while that we did discuss some source reduction specifics for California because it's so unique, the timeline to register and report is now. Every company needs to be fully registered and already reporting on their total packaging footprints, and it's due May 31st in the most advanced states. Maine will be asking for some a little bit later. Even though California has some ambiguity in how they're going to enforce the source reduction requirements over time, there is no ambiguity about the fact that companies need to have reported their data on time. And CAA has already listed, some interest rates and things like that that may be charged to producers who don't comply on time, in addition to any of the fees that are outlined in these state laws.
And again, if it wasn't entirely clear, this is based on the revenue that is generated by the products in that given state, whether it's California, Oregon, Colorado, not the value of the packaging itself. So
Oh,
it is
correct.
a relatively low bar for being an obliged enterprise that needs to meet compliance in the state. Okay, let's see. There's a question here saying that this is a particular company that is using spreadsheets to put their packaging data together and component data together. Um, what is the incremental value of doing it through a software platform like this?
Sure, I can take that one.
Yep.
So the value in using the software platform is it's fewfold. One is collaboration and multiple users accessing the data. There isn't a single analyst in a back room somewhere who, owns the data and nobody else knows how to update the spreadsheet. That's a very common thing to happen. The second is year over year tracking. The third is exports right out into your compliance formats. And the fourth is the intelligence that comes with estimating your EPR fees before you pay them, helps with budgeting, helps with decision making, and being able to cut it by your business units or top SKUs. Like all of those things enrich and help you make better decisions, which at the end of the day is one of the biggest value adds to using a more sophisticated tool that'll help you with your data.
And another here that just came through that I'll jump on. To be exempted as a small producer, is the revenue threshold based on products with plastic packaging sales or only or total company sales, including exempt products like tin can packaging?
I believe it's total company sales.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to Sebastian's point earlier, it's not just the value of the packaging, it is the retail value of the product.
Now, it's important to note that while the threshold to be a producer is inclusive of all those products with any kind of packaging, the fees associated with the different types of packaging will vary greatly. So, paper and aluminum have lower fees than single-use plastic for the very obvious reason that they are trying to incentivize a move away from more environmentally harmful packaging materials that are maybe lighter weight, but that they're trying to force a move away from. But the threshold to be a producer will include all of your sales in the jurisdiction.
Mhm. I saw a question earlier that I'm not sure if we answered directly,
Oh,
but I'm
okay.
going to go ahead and take it. Are imported goods included in the scope? Yes. The answer is yes.
Yeah, yeah. And can you talk a little bit about the 8% recycled plastic allowance? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I went through that pretty quickly, um, because this wasn't just a source reduction webinar. But there's the 25% reduction as part of source reduction. That's 25 percentage points below what your 2023 footprint was. Yes. And eight of those 25 percentage points can be achieved through using additional PCR, post-consumer recycled plastic, compared to what you're using today. So if you can increase the proportion of PCR that you're using, the PCR must be certified under one of multiple certifications that CAA will be accepting. You can essentially have to reduce less than 25% because you're using more PCR. CAA and the law founders are obviously trying to drive the market for recycled plastic to help with the economics of recycling. Makes sense in many ways, and it's probably going to be the easiest way for most producers to get to the initial reductions under that 25%.
There's a question here, someone in the Philippines asking, are plastic credits a way to meet compliance or offset the plastic footprint in the US, similar to the way the Philippine law is designed? The short answer to that is no. You cannot use credits for compliance. Funding cleanup, responsible cleanup is still a great thing to do and even can give you opportunity to access recycled material. But the laws in the US states right now, for the time being, do not enable funding of plastic credits as a way to offset your fees and your compliance requirements in the US. probably have time for one more question here. Um, yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about reuse and
Yeah,
reduction elimination?
yeah, under the California law.
Yeah,
Yeah,
on California.
I can do that. Outlined in SB 54, the legislation, the PRO CAA is required to um, get 10 percentage points of the 25 percentage point reduction from the category of reuse and refill or elimination. So all the companies aggregating to the PRO have to hit a 10% reduction based on those actions. So you can either get to that 10% by implementing reuse and refill programs, or you can do straight elimination. And elimination in terms of source reduction under the California law, I know it's very specific, it's a little complicated. Please bear with me. The elimination means you eliminate a plastic component without replacing it with anything else. So if you're selling a product that has a plastic overwrap and you completely remove that overwrap and don't replace it with, say, a plastic bag or a paper bag, that would count as elimination by making it go away. So those two things, reuse and refill and elimination, contribute to the 10% of the 25% that needs to be done to hit the source reduction targets.
Okay, we are just about at time. Um, Again, the question was asked earlier, would we share the materials? We are happy to share the materials. We really appreciate you joining. I don't know, Nanette, if you wanted to say any final words here before we go.
Yeah, no, thank you to everyone who's joined us today. I know that there are a bunch of folks who didn't realize that this was applicable to them who've now reached out and said that they wanted to get in touch. So please reach out to any of us or to your account manager if you want to set up time to ask more questions and get them answered. We're happy to do so. So thank you so much, and we'll see you all offline.